Throughout 1953, NATO leaders were reassessing their defensive posture in the event of a large-scale war. They recognized that, as a bloc, they didn't have enough aircraft capable of performing close air support, and the ones they had were mostly obsolete. In December of '53, they published NBMR-1, NATO Basic Military Requirement 1, which called for a new, lightweight tactical strike jet. The idea was to produce a cheap, reliable new jet that could be standardized across NATO and mass-produced. Since it was anticipated that the jet selected from the competition would be purchased in large numbers by most of NATO, there were several entries for the program. There were multiple designs from French companies, one from Northrop in the United States, and two more from Italy. After over a year of evaluation and analysis, the design from Fiat was selected as one of the finalists in June of 1955, and the first prototype flew the following year in 1956. The new jet, designated G.91, ended up having more problems than anticipated, including some rather serious structural issues leading to the loss of the prototype in a crash. Still, work continued, and the jet went through a number of refinements until finally winning the competition in 1958. France and the UK backed out of their earlier promises to operate the aircraft, choosing instead to continue their own domestic programs. But the G91 still went on to enter initial service with Italy and Germany. Eventually, the G91 was adopted by Portugal, but the original plan of large production and NATO-wide adoption never really happened. Right from its entry into service, it was clear to everyone that the G91 was basically obsolete as soon as it was chosen. That wasn't considered a big problem, however, since the role envisioned for the jet didn't need expensive cutting-edge planes. It was doing basic strike and reconnaissance duties, which was seen as something well-suited for a cheap and simple jet. The G91 went on to be developed into several other later variants, and it served into the 1980s and 90s. What we get in War Thunder is the G91 R1, a jet fighter in rank 5 of the Italian tech tree at battle rating 8.7. This jet has no radar or ballistics computer. Its primary armament is a set of four 12.7mm machine guns with 300 rounds per gun. You get a few different ammo belts, and I usually prefer either the Universal or the Tracers for air combat. These guns have a high cyclic rate, but the overall firepower is very low for this BR. For loadouts, you get two wing hardpoints that can take bombs, rocket pods, or missiles. Notably, if you take a pair of missiles, you lose half of your machine guns to make room for electronics equipment. Your air-to-air missile is the AA-20 Nord. This is a pretty large manually guided missile with very limited performance. It has a proximity fuse, which works well, but it's fairly slow and can be very difficult to actually aim and control the thing in the heat of combat. Your air-to-ground missile is the AS-20 Nord. This is similarly a manual command line-of-sight missile, but adjusted for ground attack. It has a smaller warhead than the bullpup, and is still difficult to hit with, but will usually one-shot a target when and if you connect. The flight performance of the G91 has some ups and downs. The jet feels slow at first, but really that's only half true. Sure, it's entirely subsonic, and its maximum speed is noticeably lower than some of the jets in its bracket, but the acceleration is actually pretty competitive really throughout most of the power curve. The climb rate also compares well, at least among other jets without an afterburner. Its dogfighting agility is reasonably good, and in short engagements, it can outturn quite a lot of the jets it goes up against. The real problem is that the energy retention is just awful. So if a fight goes past 2 or 3 maneuvers, you might find yourself out of energy stuck in a slow crawl, while the other guy can still go vertical on you or stay closer to his best cornering speeds for a little bit longer. Once this jet gets up to higher speeds, above 800 kilometers an hour or so, it starts running into a bit of a wall. The acceleration drops off hard and you get some fairly heavy control compression, which can be a very unwelcome surprise. The G91 also gets combat flaps that you can use up into the medium speeds, and they won't usually rip off until about 580 kilometers an hour. This can help give a little extra rate, but remember the additional energy bleed, which can be an issue since the energy bleed with this plane is so awful anyway. It also gets air brakes, though they're not as strong as you might want, but they can still be helpful in forcing overshoots and stuff, especially if you combine them with the flaps. Taking the G91 into air battles can be a lot of fun, especially with its good climb rate, but it can also be incredibly frustrating with its limited firepower. The Nord missiles end up being really difficult to use without a significant amount of practice, and are best suited for attacking head-on targets from around 1.5 kilometers or closer, or taking shots at large bombers. They're almost useless in a dogfight situation, but you might have some luck using one in a snapshot if someone reverses a turn or something. With the guns, well, the overall firepower of the G91 is quite simply awful for a plane classed as a jet fighter. You'll usually need a lot of time on target to actually destroy enemy aircraft, and the somewhat low ammo count per gun can seriously limit the number of kills you get per sortie. Unless you're very careful, patient, and deliberate with point-blank bursts of fire, expect to get a lot of assists with this plane. For overall match tactics, the G91 is still a competent dogfighter, and it does well in maneuvering fights. You can do boom and zoom stuff, capitalizing on its climb performance, but the low firepower limits that too, and you may actually have better luck boom and zooming with the Nords than the machine guns. Doing ground attack is an option, but the payload is incredibly limited. The pair of bombs or rocket pods won't give you a lot of scoring potential in air battles, though some players like to take the incendiary bombs and just jettison them if they can't make it to a base. Sorta just trying for a few extra points, but really not focusing on ground pounding. In close air support, the lack of a ballistics computer really holds this jet back, as with most of the others at this BR, but the rocket pods can still be effective if you get in close. The AS-20 is really one of the most difficult and least effective air-to-surface missiles in the game, but it will still score you some kills if you can connect the hits. Visually, there aren't any issues with the 3D model, but I've personally always felt that the G91 was kind of an odd-looking plane, something about the wings that's hard to describe. Adding to this, the only two paint jobs you get look almost identical, so unfortunately, low marks for the visuals this time. Landing the G91 is fairly basic. It's got a very low speed tolerance to put the gear and flaps out though, only about 340 kilometers an hour, so make sure you get used to slow approach speeds. It does get a drag chute, and that's not nothing. The cockpit gives fairly good visibility and is well detailed. A few of the instruments felt like they were in weird spots, but overall the jet was still easy to fly in VR. Pretty average cockpit. To close out on the G91 R1. This jet is a pretty good dogfighter, and it gets guided missiles. However, its missiles are manually guided. The firepower of its machine guns is low, and its overall scoring potential per sortie is also pretty low regardless of the game mode. The final verdict on the G91 R1 is that this jet is fun to fly, but it ends up being difficult to grind with due to the challenge in getting high-scoring matches with it. It's got an important place in the tech tree, but you'll probably replace it fairly quickly as other vehicles get unlocked. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this next one!